Hello, my name is Dr. Neil Paton. I'm a lecturer in farm animal health and production for the Royal Veterinary College and technical director of the Guardi BVD program. And it's my pleasure to just talk to you about the plans for Guardi BVD, the Welsh name for BVD eradication in Wales, and the progress we've made to date and what we're likely to do in the future. In Wales, we do a young stock screen for every single farm in Wales, with each farmer being eligible to take at least 5 animals for an antibody blood sample that will allow us to determine whether the animals have BVD or have been exposed to BVD, and to define the farm as being BVD present versus BVD free. All the vets can take as many samples as they're required to make that happen, and then they can decide whether that farm needs to do a persistently infected animal hunt to eradicate BVD on those farms, and then we build up with herd health advice to ensure that they don't fall back into that trap again, and hopefully drive everyone towards being BVD free. In terms of the timelines that we have been doing this work for, so this has been in plan since 2011, when the initial discussions were made at the Royal Welsh Agricultural Show with a number of stakeholders that we'll talk about in a bit, to a 2016 funding application made to the Rural Development Plan for Europe, for Wales, a European funding body. And then in 2017, in September, we started testing on farms, with the initial deadline being September 2020, the deadline for screening. We've made a further extension through to the screening program through to March 2021, when we came close to that September 2020 deadline. And then subsequent to that, we've done a further deadline with a voluntary program now being extended out to December 2022. In terms of progress we've made, I'd just like to refer what we've done to this cattle density map. So this is it describes how many cattle are where in Wales, and gives us a baseline to say what level of penetration have we made into the Welsh cattle industry overall. So keeping that in mind and having a look at what farms we have tested, the green farms on the left-hand side of the screen are all the farms that we have tested, and that the red farms are all the farms that we have tested and found there to be at least one antibody positive animal on those farms in our testing thing. This takeaway from this is that we have managed to penetrate all parts of Wales geographically. There's no area where there are cattle that we believe we're underrepresented or poorly represented in our testing across the board. And similarly, with the positive farms, where the cattle are is where we get lots of positive disease. And again, there's no specific geographical region that is over or underrepresented in terms of disease, as far as we can tell. And I'll return to that sort of theme in some subsequent slides. But continuing on to give it some more numerical sort of values, these are the sort of January figures of 8,601 farms screened at this point, with 1,218 getting gold, so 3 negative tests, a certificate that we award for farms that are doing particularly well, and they can work those say up from bronze, silver, and through to gold, and you can see the numbers that they have achieved from there. And we've got 26.1%, 2,400 roughly, that are positive, that need to start. We want to work with those farms to get them to become at least bronze or hopefully silver before the end of the program overall. And again, 1,000 farms engaged with the program for the first time last year. So even though we're three years down into the program and beyond our original plan, they we're still getting farmers engaging for the first time. So that gives us confidence that we will manage to get much closer to that 100% engagement through the voluntary program, possibly hitting 90% before we finish as a program overall. Surveillance is only part of the problem, part of the issue. So the other part of this is PI hunting, and we have had 30% of farms undertake a PI hunt to try and find the PIs. That's about 30% of the eligible farms that we have on board and we could use. And we've identified 675 persistently infected animals to date within the program. And 25% of those are slaughtered and removed from farm as we would like to see them, but 50% retained on farm, 25% are sold on addition to that. So we know that we've got animals that are moving around this farm much less than we would, or much more than we would like. We'd really like to see all of the animals, the PI animals, slaughtered. But we've got to work on getting 50% of some of those animals moved off farm into the slaughterhouse, and certainly more importantly, prevent them being moved on and sold to other farms and then spreading the disease around the place. Coming onto that and looking a little back about who's got the disease out there. So I've already indicated that geographically we don't think we've got a major problem. I think we've indicated that people are moving animals, are floating around the place, and that movement of animals is probably our biggest risk factor, or in fact our only identifiable risk factor for disease on the farm. So if you introduce cattle, you're about 1.5 to 1.8 times more likely to have the disease than if you don't introduce cattle. But no other sort of risk factor that we examined, and this is some work that a student of mine did last year, is suggestive of us having any disease or having an impact on the disease. So production type of farming, size of farm, none of that seemed to make any difference. We think it's pretty much a disease of trading cattle on there, and that influences our thinking going forward for the near future as well. Other things that we need to just want to flag up is really farmer participation. So over and above the actual getting involved with the testing, the use of certificates is quite common. We're seeing them using at the markets, and so as far as Cumbria as well, people are using them to demonstrate that they have disease, or they don't have disease. So if they've got a gold or a silver certificate, that's being used as a selling point within Wales and beyond as well. But more anecdotally, more soft acceptance of what we're doing out there, as exemplified by some of these quotes in terms of it should be compulsory, that it's made them confident in their farm, that there's just no reason not to do it as well. So all of those that suggest that we're getting it right in terms of getting our farmers involved in this program as well. So we couldn't do the Guardi BVD program without guidance from external stakeholders, and we are guided by a steering group made up of those stakeholders, which comprises of both unions in Wales, the Farmers Union of Wales, the National Farmers Union, their Welsh branch, who keep us honest and give us feedback from the farmers on the ground in their associations and make sure that what we do is acceptable to them. Similarly, we have a British Veterinary Association representation on the steering group, again, to make sure that the vets and that their representative bodies can feed back into us to tell us what we've got, and their associate organisation, the British Cattle Veterinary Association, also are represented as well. We have the National Beef Association, again, just to keep us getting industry feedback to make sure that what we're doing is honest, is the right thing and accepted by the industry as a whole, and we're doing enough to keep them happy or keep them very pleased with us. We have the architectural AHTB and the HCC, the dairy and red meat levy boards as well represented on the stakeholders, again, to give us guidance to help us make the correct decisions whenever we need to change or tweak the program overall and ensure that we're delivering what we said we would do at the start of the program. And lastly, we have veterinary delivery partners that are observers on the group, because they manage the vets on the ground as actually doing the surveillance, the blood sampling on a day-to-day basis. Importantly, the Welsh Government are also sort of observers on the steering groups. Officially, they're not sort of active members of the steering group, but we wouldn't be able to do a lot of this without them. They've been fundamental to the process and fundamental from start to finish in terms of going through a disease eradication program. We worked with them to secure the funding, and there's a lot of work done in the scenes to ensure that BVD would be a possible outcome of the way the funding process was set up, supportive of our plan from the inception of the idea of BVD eradication through to legislation being developed. So at least we were very clear at the start of the plan that legislation would probably be where we'd have to end up. And they're still receptive to legislation being implemented, and I'll discuss the plans for legislation all over through there. But fundamentally and importantly, Welsh Government matched Rural Development Plan for Wales priorities as developed by the Welsh Government, and that allowed us to draw down the money and go down the route that we have taken. So we've got a few things that need to happen next, and we're going to go forward over the next year, and that a lot of this will be working with Welsh Government and will rely on Welsh Government cooperation to deliver. But we're certainly going to work with multi-species whales databases. The multi-species whales is the cattle movement, the animal movement database that is going to replace the cattle tracing service here in Wales. The Welsh Government, again, emphasizing that link, has an ambition to make sure that that's linked to animal disease, animal health status as well. And BVD is planned to be the first one, the exemplar, the one that proves that it can be done. So we'll work with them to make sure that our data can feed in directly into the Welsh Government database as well. Clearly, we don't believe that we're going to make a BVD eradication on a completely voluntary program. So once we've done the voluntary program in December 2022, we want to work with Welsh Government to deliver legislation after that. And that requires lawyer time, essentially. That requires them to devote some resources into taking our concept, which I'll outline in a slide or two, next to a document that is suitable for presenting in front of the government. And then we've got to provide a time for a public consultation on the proposed legislation, again, getting feedback from essentially our stakeholders, but the wider farming industry to then feed into that legislation and modify it depending on the purposes that they are, depending on the opinions that are derived from that consultation. So the legislation that we're going to look at, we're proposing, and this is very much the industry stakeholder group, the Gwardi BVDs ask, rather than what will actually be delivered, because as I've indicated, there's a compulsory a consultation period that has to be put in place, and that will heavily influence what actually gets produced by by Welsh Government to allow us to complete BVD eradication. But we're talking really about mandatory surveillance. So every farm being tested throughout Wales for the presence of BVD antibodies to determine whether there's disease on that farm. And then if any antibody, or if there is antibodies found on that farm, then we restrict the movement of positive farms unless there are certain exemptions to that. So things like moving direct to slaughter or determining that that animal has not actually got the virus at the time of the movement. So it's actually not a PI animal, essentially, is what we're mandating here. Other things that we really want to talk about or put into the legislation, really, we'd want to think about maybe making it a PI hunt almost compulsory once you're on that positive, so you know that every animal that has to have a status, even though it's not going to move off the farm. Any antigen positive, any virus positive animals may be placed into isolation of facilities at the correct standard that satisfies requirements and will actually be effective, an inspection to make sure that that is likely to happen. And then we're thinking about putting a health plan in place, so making sure farmers that are positive actually write down some sort of plan to ensure that they are going to do something about it. But overall, that's the tone and the sort of thread of the legislation, the sort of the concept of the legislation. But again, as it goes through consultation, it will almost certainly be heavily modified from what we're presenting here. So the takeaway really is just that it's got that legislation is part of the plan in the future there. So I think that's all. I've just got to make thanks to the John Griffiths, Hannah Cooper, Leslie Griffiths, and David Evans, the team who are the technical teams at the Gwardi BVD, who do all the sort of payments and talking to farmers and all that, and the general day-to-day work of entering data. Farmers for getting involved, and vets obviously for actually engaging with this program as a whole and pushing it well towards success, and hopefully will continue to do so in the future. Thank you very much.